You know, I'm looking around this room and I'm thinking two things. Number one, I'm thinking what an incredible organization Adoption Network Cleveland is, which I already knew. I've known Betsy and I've known the organization since I was part of NACAC, so that's been since 1997. And I've always been impressed with the way that Betsy is a leader, but then also her staff and her volunteers as people that know how to follow a good leader, really understand that Adoption Network really does mean more than adoptive parents and adoptive children. It's birth families, it's foster families, it's kinship families, it's also the community. And you have an amazing community here in Cleveland. When I think about who needs to be at the table though, it's all the people that aren't in these seats. Because everybody in this room gets it. Everybody in this room has the fire. Everybody in this room is putting families and children first and doing what they can do on both a personal and on a professional level, on a community level, in their work. Adoption Network Cleveland really does walk the talk that they have. We're all about everybody, and in fact, that's really been visible here tonight. But what I want to charge each one of you to do is when you go out into the world, when you talk to your neighbors, when you talk to your fellow colleagues, when you talk to your staff or your boss, when you talk to the lady at the grocery store, when you talk to anybody in your community, tell them about Adoption Network Cleveland. Tell them about the good work that's done. Tell them about the children in this county, in this state, in this country that still need something. Those kids who are still waiting in care, those kids who are being reunified and need the support of a community around their families so that those reunifications can last and can be successful. Talk to them about the fact that the majority of kids that come into our foster care system don't come into our system because of abuse. They come into our system because of poverty, which then ends up looking like neglect. When you talk to people, when you tell them these stories, when you let them know who the children and the families really are, hopefully what will happen is you'll see a shift in the way people feel, in the way people think about the kids. Because what I know from the work that I've done throughout Massachusetts and now throughout the US and Canada is that the people in our rooms and the people in our groups, they get it. They really do get it. But the people out there in the world don't always get it. And what we find is that birth parents, birth moms, birth dads are sometimes vilified for things that they had no control over. When you don't have enough money to put a roof over your child's head, or when you have to make a choice between your own physical care and the care of your child, when you don't have money to put food on the table, it's really hard to look like a good parent. But when the community comes together, when we start implementing new policies around, Families First Prevention Services Act, and other pieces that we're doing on a federal level, on the local level, when we really do that well, then we are going to see fewer kids coming into our system. And when we see fewer kids coming into our system is going to be able to support those kids and their families and the relatives that step forward. And really, if you think about it, and no slings and arrows adoptive families, I'm an adoptive mom too. I adore my adopted children. But I also know their birth parents. And I only got to know their birth parents after my kids were older. Their adoptions were closed, not because of our decision making, but because of the decision making in Massachusetts in the foster care system. And I came to realize that for 3 of my 4 adopted children, if their birth families had had a 10th of the support that I had, those children would still be in their families. We don't always think about what's going on in an open, in an accepting, and in a kind way. I got to know a wonderful woman, my friend Harriet Jackson Lyons. Harriet is 93 now and is in hospice care. and has been one of the most brilliant people I've ever had the honor to know. I met her when I first got into this work, and Harriet is a mom. Harriet had 7 children. One of them is now deceased. And Harriet is raising, or has raised, her 2 grandchildren. Her oldest daughter struggled with addiction. And when Harriet came forward to the public system to say, I'm going to step up to the plate on behalf of my 2 grandchildren, she was held to a standard that was so different than the one that I was held to. I came to find out when I was talking to her. And we realized that as a kinship grandmother and as an adoptive mom, we had so much more in common than we had that was different. We had in common that we cared about our kids before anything else. We had in common that we would do anything in the world for our kids. We also had in common that we were going to do whatever it took to make sure that that next generation did not have the same experience. I see it now with my grandchildren. I see my son that we adopted at 15 is now 46. He's way older than me. And his 2 children, they talk about adoption all the time. They know their dad is adopted. They know that that is a great thing for him. They know that he has another family that came before us, and that's also a great thing. They're very comfortable with it. And I think about the way that his 2 children have come into this and how open they are and how accepting they are. And a good deal of that is because from the moment they entered the world, they heard words like adoption, like foster care. It was just natural. It was just something that felt right. It felt good for them. They, at 11 and 9, talk about the fact that one day they'll be adoptive parents. I look at my son, Justice, who had an extremely difficult time in foster care. Justice and his sister Tanya never lived with birth mom, and they had a really tough time in care. And at 33 and 34, they're doing better. One of them doing better than the other, as I was telling Betsy. But Justice has now learned how to be a dad to a little 5-year-old girl who he adopted when he married that little girl's mom. And although those 2 are divorced, his former wife and he, they've learned how to negotiate that relationship as well. And they have learned that you can, in fact, have more rather than less. I think it was a wonderful lesson for their little girl to learn, for Aubrey to learn. I think that every time we have the opportunity to have a conversation about our families, what they look like, how they're put together, how they maintain and sustain, I think what people need to hear from us are a few things. They need to hear, number 1, that this is an act of unconditional commitment. I was telling Betsy, I was up in Toronto last week and we were doing training, and 2 of the young people that were helping us do the training were folks that had aged out of the system up there, brilliant young women, just absolutely brilliant. And afterwards, one of the adults that wanted to move forward and make a permanent commitment said, I don't understand why you were talking about all of the difficulties kids have. I want one of the kids like those 2 that we're talking tonight. Why do you always talk about the difficulties? And my partner up there was so brilliant. She said, you know, every one of us, even me, can look good and can be in a good place for a few hours at a time. We need people that can be there when the good hours are not happening. And that's not just for kids that have been in care. That's not just for kids that have been adopted. All of us have bad days. But all of us don't walk around with those labels. All of us don't walk around with people wondering and looking and trying to figure it out. All of us don't walk around having lost the most important thing in our life, which is to grow up with the family we're born to. And that kind of a loss can cause our kids to look a little bit different and to struggle a little bit harder sometimes, particularly when it comes to other people's expectations. When you've had all of your expectations sort of dashed, it's a little bit harder to worry about other people's expectations. And so I really do, I want to charge you with, yes, go swipe that card because it's super fun. But I also want to charge you with making the conversation happen whenever you can. And I think I think one of the most important things about that is to both be honest about what is needed for kids, what our obligation is to our kids, and also to elevate what is wonderful and good about them. It's one of the conflicts that I always have when I'm doing advocacy work, right? We have to make the case for why we need certain services, we need to make the case for why we need funding. But I think about the fact that sometimes when we make the case, we paint a picture that can be very disheartening. It can be very difficult for people to hear the stories that they might need to hear in order to buy into what we want from them. And so I've really worked hard, rather than to paint a picture of need, instead to paint a picture of potential. I want people to invest in our kids. I want people to invest in our families, because I know that our kids and our families are pretty special people. And I know that when we invest in them, when we believe in them, and when we are there for them unconditionally, that only good things can happen. Now, the other thing I want to say about Adoption Network Cleveland is that, in fact, you guys really do embrace everybody in a way that I have not seen in other places. And I was on the plane, and I was actually able to get online and go to my Facebook page. And I don't know if you all know this, but I just kind of wanted to take a little look at the about. So among the awards that have come to this organization through Betsy, but I know Betsy doesn't do it on her own, and I'm not going to embarrass you by assuming that you do. You have staff, you have volunteers, you have a board of directors, and you have a community that believes in what you do. But there's an MMA Velarde Humanitarian Award from the American Adoption Congress, an award I never even knew existed. National recognition as a Congressional Angel in Adoption. And the NACAC Adoption Advocate of the Year, Adoption Activist of the Year in 2006. And that same year, the Cleveland Foundation presented an award. 2009, the Health and Human Services Adoption Excellence Award. That's a big one. That is a real biggie. The Foster Care Hero Award from Ronna Carver Scholarship Fund. Health and Human Services Adoption Excellence Award 2 years later for additional work done on behalf of older youth. The next year, the Champion Award from the National Center for Adoption Law and Policy, Drenda Lake and Memorial Award, another biggie. 2013, Member Organization of the Year for Greater Cleveland Community Shares, and the Pillar Award for Community Service Executive Director of the Year from the Medical Mutual and Smart Business. 2014, we gave you another award for the Parent Group of the Year, because we're smart at NACAC, we like good people. And also the Advocate of the Year from the Ohio Adoption Planning Group in 2013. In 2015, the Eleanor Gerson Leadership in Social Justice Award, the Women Who Excel Award, the Virginia Colson Award for Service to Families and Children. You do good work. We gotta keep it going. So you have your charge. Next year, all of the tables that have empty chairs should be filled with people who have not already drank the Kool-Aid. We want to bring more people into the fold. We want people to understand that they don't have to be a foster, adoptive, or kinship parent in order to make a difference. They can be a mentor. They can be part of that community table. They can be kind and be non-judgmental. They cannot look at our children and our families askance and wonder why they're not behaving the way somebody else wants them to. They cannot tell our families how to parent their children better in the grocery store and other places. Mostly you can just be there for people with an open mind and an open heart and a willing hand to do what you can to make it a better place. You've got a great community. Spread the word, because I know I will. Thank you.